You have to.
Yeah, no, I did see the massive.
Just started. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. This meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck.
Here.
Councilors Burdick. Here. Afghan.
Here.
Corrigan. Here. Wendland.
Here.
And Boot.
Here.
And Councilor Rapp is excused.
Thank you so much. Now, everyone, will you please stand, remove your hats, and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are going to start this afternoon with a presentation from the Youth Leadership Council on a ban of flavored tobacco products, soliciting the council to join them in a letter to Senate President Wagner. I'd like to invite our management analyst, Quinn Bruner, and members of the Youth Leadership Council to please come forward and have a seat. Missing this, are you coming? We're so glad you were all here, and I know that you're joined by some of your colleagues in the audience on the Youth Leadership Council as well. Thank you all for being here. If you could please introduce yourselves, tell us your name, perhaps what school you go to, and whether this is your first, second, or so on year on the Youth Leadership Council. Welcome.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having us here. My name is Naomi Robinson. I'm a 10th grader at LOHS and a member of the Youth Leadership Council. Today, we are inviting members of the City Council to join the YLC in advocating for the passage of a statewide ban on the sale of flavored tobacco. I'm joined by 3 of my fellow members.
My name is Liam Aranda Michelle. I'm a junior at Lake Oswego High School.
My name is Allison Corcola. I'm also a junior at Lake Oswego High School.
My name is Kara Chin, and I'm a senior at Lake Ridge High School.
So, who are we? The Youth Leadership Council is a group of high schoolers who provide a voice for Lake Oswego youth to city and community leaders. And we also learn about government on all levels. Our group is passionate about issues relevant to our peers, such as the safety and health of youth. So, as you can see here is a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today, such as health disparities connected to flavored tobacco use, its impact on youth, setting a precedent, and later we'll have time for some questions. So before we delve into the details of our proposal, here is some important background information. Tobacco is an addictive substance, and flavored tobacco use is prevalent in youth. Furthermore, flavored tobacco products are just as addictive and dangerous to one's health as non-flavored tobacco products. Additionally, overall health concerns include lung cancer, cardiovascular diseases, anxiety, depression, birth defects, and many more.
Exactly, and when you're considering endorsing a policy decision like this, it's important to consider the disparate impact the status quo has on racially and ethnically diverse groups, kind of distancing our objectivity from the fairly homogenous community that we live in. And so in doing our research and conducting, informing our opinion, we found across the board that the impact of tobacco use exacerbated by the addition of flavor is generally worsened in non-white groups. So for example, in 2021, from the CDC's Office for Disease Prevention and Health Promotion located in Atlanta, Watkins and others using data collected from the CDC's National Youth Tobacco Survey found that the use of most flavored tobacco products increased at least one time use, that is, across all racial and ethnic groups. And in particular, this effect is exacerbated in Black and African American communities. So, for example, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, which is a national nonprofit organization aiming to mitigate tobacco use in children and promote health nationwide, finds that tobacco use is the #1 cause of preventable death in Black Americans, resulting in 45,000 annual and preventable deaths. And as we'll get into in our next 2 slides here, Big Tobacco predatorially targets Black Americans with their marketing strategies and promotions. And as a result, looking at one-time use, this has led to an exacerbation over time. In the 1950s, 10% of all Black smokers used menthol, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a flavor additive that imbues a cooling sensation when tobacco is ingested and is thus misperceived as being less averse health-wise. And that number has risen to 85% today. And this is also universally impacted by flavoring. And so 85% of African American smokers use menthol cigarettes, and that's in comparison to 29% of white smokers found in 2020. And so the Youth Truth Initiative is another organization similar to Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids that kind of looks at similar data, and they found, at least amongst middle schoolers in 2018, taken from the National Health Interview Survey, that 70.5% of African American middle school students use menthol products in comparison to 52.3% for Hispanic and 51.4% for white. And so in looking at the kind of impacts and the strategies Big Tobacco uses, we've kind of parsed this into 2 genres, capitalizing on culture and persistent community presence. And so it's pretty obvious that looking historically at their sponsorships and their tactics, that Big Tobacco looks at cultural events and direct mail promotions. They advertise in publications and venues popular with Black audiences. So for example, a 2011 review found that the Ebony magazine was almost 10 times more likely than the People magazine to contain advertisements for menthol cigarettes, which is that flavor additive. And community presence as well. So for example, more tobacco retailers are consistently present, looking at a joint 2015 paper written primarily from the American Lung Association, finding that more tobacco retailers are present in areas with larger Black, Hispanic, and low-income populations.
Flavored tobacco products and e-cigarettes don't just affect minorities, but the youth in our own community. A recent LOSD health survey of 11th graders who currently use tobacco products revealed that 80% of those students use an e-cigarette within the last month. And more importantly, as seen in this data, e-cigarettes are a gateway. This figure shows student responses to the question of the very first time you used any tobacco or vaping products, which type of product did you use? And an overwhelming percentage at around 78.3% said that they used e-cigarettes. Additionally, flavored tobacco disproportionately affects youth. According to information published by the CDC and the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, in 2019, the largest smokeless tobacco companies spent around $8.2 billion in advertising and promotion expenses in the United States alone. This advertisement is heavily targeted towards youth with methods such as normalization of use, bright colors, and misconceptions of harm. And as shown in the picture in the top right, tobacco products are often made more appealing by making them look similar to candies.
And yeah, if you walk into one of our schools today, especially the middle schools and the high schools, you can see this play out in real time. Like every other day when I go to the bathroom, you know, the big disability accessible stall, sometimes you'll see like 3 or 4 pairs of shoes in there and the whole bathroom smells like strawberry shortcake and you're like, oh, someone's doing something they're not supposed to be doing. So yeah, it's very prevalent in our schools. We can see this every other day. Just yeah, don't use the school bathrooms during lunch, guys.
Finally, this map illustrates the distribution of tobacco retailers in Lake Oswego. The blue dots represent schools and the red ones represent tobacco retailers, and it's very clear that there is a correlation between the location of tobacco retailers and schools, and a lot of them are in very close proximity to our LO schools.
Oh, this mouse is very sensitive. Anyways, setting a precedent. So another reason why this is important is that policies like these bans, they are much more effective when states work together. So currently there's existing legislation in many states, including California, that already ban the sale of flavored tobacco. And this is not as effective in parts such as Northern California because of the close proximity to the border with Oregon, which does not yet ban flavored tobacco products. So not banning these in Oregon would facilitate interstate trafficking of these illegal products. And we can see a case study of this in our own community. So for example, in the greater Portland metro area, Washington County and Multnomah County are currently like pursuing bans of flavored tobacco. Clackamas County isn't. And so if the bans survive in the courts and Clackamas County doesn't enact a ban, then like people can just drive over to Clackamas to buy these products. So it's more effective when we ban these things on a statewide level. And this also incentivizes the national legislation to look at this and to ban on a national level, which makes this policy even more effective. Because as we know, like these areas in the patchwork quilt of legislation that don't have these laws are the ones that are most susceptible to high rates of trafficking and high rates of tobacco use, and that's kind of not what we want. So moving on, yeah, so you can also see how effective this policy has been in areas in which it has already been enacted. So at the start of 2023 in California, following their ban of flavored tobacco, tobacco sales were down 14.4% year on year compared to 2022. This data is from CPS, which is a publication that specializes in convenience store retailers and gas station retailers, and they are like one of the largest vendors, groups of vendors that sell tobacco products. So strong state legislation incentivizes national legislation to pass, and we know that this policy is effective in reducing tobacco use and tobacco purchases in places that have already passed these. It also shows that this government policy, parts of it can be replicated in other areas. So this specific ban only puts the onus on retailers to not sell these products, and they will be fined if they sell these products. The legislation is not going after people who are using these products, because we know that these communities that are more likely to use these tobacco products are more likely to historically have been targeted by law enforcement, and we don't want to repeat that, and we don't want this to be a gateway to mass incarceration. And so how this law is kind of formatted is a great way to look at other laws for other things like gun safety legislation going forward. And moving on, you can also see, so this bill was actually proposed to be in the 2024 short session, but it was removed partly because it was blocked by the House Ways and Means Committee. And the House Ways and Means Committee essentially analyzes kind of the budget of bills. And because there is a tobacco tax in Oregon and a tax on tobacco-related products, they estimated a $92 million shortfall in revenue if this ban were to pass. However, one of the most important things that this bill can address is how we can internalize external costs. So what the Ways and Means Committee did not consider in their initial review of this bill is that tobacco-related illnesses and healthcare costs cost Oregonians $5.7 billion annually. So when you compare the lost tax revenue versus the kind of money that we're spending on medical expenses, they're not even comparable. Like, it's a whole different ballgame. And so one of these things that the bill can help address is how we can internalize these costs. So we can think about medical costs, we can think about healthcare costs, we can also think about the cost from lost productivity if someone were to become ill following a tobacco-related disease. We can also think about the cost of not using that money to do other things. You're buying tobacco products instead of, I don't know, investing the money or doing something else or taking classes that would be better for you economically in the long run. And so all of these lost costs should be factored in when we're looking at a healthcare policy such as this. And yeah, the last thing we want to say is thank you. We really appreciate your time. We hope that you will find it as valuable for us as it is for you guys to value human life over tax dollars and to value kind of the external costs that we're thinking of when we're talking about pursuing a ban like this. And we request that you will consider co-signing our letter advocating for a ban on flavored tobacco products in Oregon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We have a copy of the letter included in our packet that the Youth Council is requesting that we join them in signing on to. A great job with the presentation. It's obvious you all put a lot of work and research into this information, which was presented very comprehensively and in a very organized way, which we really appreciate. So thank you very much. Colleagues, do you have any questions? Members of the Youth Council, any questions? Councilor Afghan.
Thank you for coming forth with a material that's concise, direct, data-driven, and a conclusion that makes sense. Generation before me made some decisions that we're still dealing with it. Our generation is still trying to transition to where you're headed, but we have some work to do. And I'm looking at the four of you and behind you as the next generation who's going to show us how things are supposed to be done, not only financially, but what's best for us as humans and for our environment. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Councilor Moop.
Oh, yeah, I'm very impressed by what you're doing. And I mean, for our generation not to accept what you folks are saying, it's really like, I'm ashamed, to be part of a generation that's doing harm to you on many ways, but this one is one of them. And I am also very happy and optimistic of the future, I had a friend I met a long time ago who wrote a book that's called The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And he's Aikwe Arma. You can get the book. But I think the beautiful ones are born now. You are here and you are in front of us, and I'm very proud. And you continue, we're going to be behind you. The question you posed was the most important. Is human life less than $92 million of loss in the Oregon budget? I think those are the thing where people lobby our politicians, cigarette people, they go lobby them. People say in America the best way to be rich is to buy a politician, and those are bought. And we should not accept it. Your generation should not accept it. You should not accept politicians that are bought by lobbies, that are spreading fear, death, and everything to our youth. It's bad. Smoking, I used to smoke in an age that was not appropriate because we were never told the reality of what cigarette could do to a human body. So now I'm glad that you know, and you should continue to advocate for your friends, and we will co-sign. I am 100% sure that this council will co-sign. We will be thinking of talking to our lawyers to see if we can ban it in the city, like outright. No more those things in our city. And if it's a yes for our legal team, I would be among the one who will push for that. And I'm pretty sure my colleagues will follow. We don't need those in our city. My friend John is talking about the blue zone. And the blue zone is that zone you were working, a healthy zone. We just received the Council of Japan. They live 85 years. That's their life expectancy. In America, we are in the 70s. Because in America, you can buy a politician and have them spread bad food, bad stuff to smoke, and we kill our youth and our population, and we should not do it. And thank you, folks. I'm very proud of you. Like, your parents should be also very proud of you. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So are you on board with the letter?
Oh, yeah, 100.
Councilor Wendland.
Yeah, you're a little ambiguous there, Sen. So, I guess I'm always impressed when the youth council comes before us. I'm also impressed almost with any youth that comes in front of the city council. And I just have to say that I'm a huge proponent of involvement at your level. And the more engaged you are, I think the better results, certainly for us adults, when we hear something that's prevalent in your world. Your presentation was spot on. I guess I have a question. How big of a pressure point is it for you guys to be doing some sort of tobacco? I mean, would you say that it's pushed as a peer pressure type thing, or is it, and you don't have to answer whether you do tobacco or drugs or anything like that. I'm just saying in general, would you say that the youth in our schools are pushed into doing vaping and
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if my story is very representative because I'm friends with a bunch of nerds, but like personally, I haven't had peer pressure to smoke because of like my friend group, and we don't really like do that stuff. But I know that like there are obviously friend groups who do it, and it's like their recreational activity is to get together and like smoke together, and like not just like tobacco, but like other things. But like that's like their recreational activity. So I'm sure if you're in one of those friend groups, there is tremendous pressure to do it. I'm just not in one of those friend groups.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that, but I think that I've definitely experienced a little bit of pressure from some of my friends at school. It's not like supposed to be pressure, you know, but like they just kind of mention stuff they do, and they're like, yeah, you know, we were like smoking and stuff, and it's kind of like an indirect way of, I guess, peer pressure, and I think it definitely does exist, and sometimes it comes from people you might not expect it to come from, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Kara and Allison in that it really depends on, who your friends are, who you place your trust in, who you confide in. But I'd say the issue I find most pressing is the normalization and the misperception of it. If everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. And it becomes like such a ubiquitous and common sight that you become desensitized to it, desensitized to the reality of what it does to your body, how it harms you, your physical and your mental health. And when you see so many of your peers, it's not necessarily, like, I don't feel that much pressure inadvertently in my daily life just because of, who I'm friends with and who I hang around, but more so that you become so desensitized. It becomes a facet of reality rather than, something startling and something to be concerned about.
Yeah, it's just like if someone tells me that someone like I know smokes, I would just not be surprised anymore.
Do you think that a ban would serve to, provide a message kind of contrary to the status quo?
I would think so, absolutely, yeah.
I just hope it makes it, yeah.
No. What the in the recent past, we moved the age from 18 to 21 to purchase tobacco products, and of course at 18, from 50s, 60s. I mean, throughout generations, people have been able to get their hands on the products regardless. But we move it to 21, we have better IDs now, all this stuff, right? But yet, still very prevalent. Underage users. So how, some may ask, well, if there's a ban, it's illegal anyway for youth to use. How are they getting their hands on it now? Just anecdotally, are you able to, how do folks get their hands on it?
I actually have something to say for this. Yeah, I think that one thing that people don't address very much is like the familial pressure that can come with that, because I know people in my family smoke, and I have friends who have siblings that are older than them who smoke, and I think that a majority of people who, youth who get this, get it from family members who are older than 21 who are currently doing it, because I know the first time I was exposed to like an e-cigarette or a kind of cigarette was when I was like 6 years old with my aunt, and it's just kind of that normalization of it like in your family and the kind of thing, like maybe you can smoke while I'm here, because I don't see you that much, I'm in college, and it's just kind of that kind of thing. I know my friend has experienced that, and she's currently working through it, and I think it's a little sad that pressure comes from your family. But.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Please,
is it more from a social standpoint, or is it from a stress level?
I think that it can be both. I think that like depends on the person. I know people who do it socially, but I also know that that stress can be utilized as a marketing tactic, kind of like this is like an easy way to relieve stress, So I think it just depends on the situation that you're in. But, yeah.
Last comment. You guys presented extremely well, and I am in front of all kinds of different people that present, and I just have so much faith in this generation. You just knocked it out of the park, and just keep the social skills going. I know a lot of you can do things on social media and whatever, but this interaction and the ability to express your ideas in person will get you very far in this world, and just keep doing it. You just, you knocked it out of the park. Yes. And I fully support this measure.
Okay, that's great. And the broader context here is, there have been bills introduced in the Oregon legislature that have not been brought to the floor for a vote. I think it's been the main, and we were hoping they would in the short session, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The bills have been filed, and this bill is not approved. So we're really sending this letter to encourage legislative leadership to bring this bill forward in the next long session. And then in the meantime, to join with other communities in showing broad support for passing this, to put some pressure on the legislature to get this bill up for a vote. We know that it has bipartisan support, but as you said, the lobbying pressures, and as Councilor Moose said, are very heavy, we think, on this issue. And like Councilor Boob, I'm also very interested to know what, in the interim, what we could be doing here locally in our own community, especially given what's going on in Multnomah. Even some of our stores are in Multnomah County, so they're already facing the ban, but others, of course, are in Clackamas County where there's no ban being considered, and so something for us to look at. But is everyone good signing there? Okay. Thank you all very much. We're so pleased to join you, and we thank you for bringing this important issue forward and doing such a good job delivering it. Thank you
very much.
Thank
Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate you all.
Yeah.
Yes, good job. We are now going
It's
to,
been Christmas break, by the way, so these guys are
Yes.
in on their own time, so.
we're now going to move into public comment. And if there's anyone here who would like to provide public comment and who has not already filled out one of these white forms, they're available on the back table, then please fill them out and hand to Ms. Linder. Remember, you have 3 minutes to speak, timer on the table, and we're glad for anyone that's here to deliver public comment. And Gail Walmark, you are up first. Welcome and good afternoon. Please make yourself right at home and just introduce yourself whenever you're ready, and your co-presenter as well.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thanks for this time. I'm Gail Walmark, Board Secretary with Friends of Lusher Farm, here with my colleague Robert Hansen, our treasurer. And we're here on behalf of our entire leadership team to share our request for your upcoming 2024 goal setting. Friends of Lusher Farm is honored to represent Lake Oswego's most unique park and committed to ensuring that key improvements recommended in the 2013 Lusher Area Master Plan LAMP now get the attention and action they deserve. Respectfully, we request that 2 key Lusher projects, 1, a new safe vehicular access and expanded parking area, and 2, an expansion of agricultural programs, are prioritized as an initiative in the 2024 Parks, Recreation, and Natural Areas goal. In the decades since the LAMP was adopted, considerable active recreation facilities have been or are being developed on Lusher area properties and nearby just across Stafford Road. So we are now considering only the remaining properties, about 100 acres, including the 45-acre namesake Lusher Farm, that are outside city limits in unincorporated Clackamas County and zoned exclusive farm use. These 100 acres are a precious canvas of rural character, historical significance, bountiful agricultural land, and magnificent open space natural areas. They are beloved by hundreds of gardeners, CSA members, clematis devotees, summer day camp kids, and all who walk, run, and bike the trails and pathways, if not a significant majority of all Lake Oswego residents. These 100 acres are also Lake Oswego's unique opportunity to pioneer a new and unconventional kind of city park, one that celebrates our agricultural roots and our reverence for nature, one that establishes a vital urban-rural buffer, and importantly, one that could also model new approaches to environmental and agricultural stewardship that will help reduce food insecurity, teach us all how to live healthier, more sustainable lives. We do appreciate all the many competing requests that you must consider, but now is our moment to envision the one-of-a-kind city park we could create by elevating these priority Lusher projects to action and finding and committing funding for them. That only happens if Council shares the vision and adopts these Lusher projects in your 2024 goals. This request was submitted to each of you and to City Manager Bennett earlier today, and I'll just note that we did include a few key references in the appendix of that file, including a summary map of the remaining properties for you. So thank you very much for your consideration, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Ms. Fulmer. Thank you, Mr. Culloch. We take your comments to heart. We appreciate you being here. Mr. Conrad. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name's, thank you for the time here, because you're busy. But thank you for opening this to my comments on the ALTA report on the McVey-Stafford corridor, which you will be talking about later on. I'd like to make a couple of comments. One is my understanding of speed, and just stay with me for a little bit. Man has really only had significant experience with the kind of speeds that we have in our cars now for the past 100 years. The danger of falls, however, is hardwired in us. We feel uneasy when we're on the edge of a cliff. I do. Most of you probably do. From the 6th century BC until the 1st century CE, the Romans would execute criminals with 100% reliability by throwing them off an 80-foot Tarpeian rock cliff, which is at the west end of the Forum. Those who were executed landed with a speed of 49 miles an hour, which you could consider the execution speed. So it was, of course, only in the Enlightenment that we were able to convert height to speed. But that's what I'm doing here. In the New World, Plains Indians, when they hunted bison, they would kill most of the bison and severely maim the rest by driving them off a buffalo jump cliff. One such cliff, called Head Smashed Inn in Alberta, was 36 feet high. So when they jumped off the cliff, or chased off the cliff, the bison hit the ground at 33 miles an hour. So you could consider 33 miles an hour a buffalo jump speed. I experience a very, I think, healthy fear when walking along trails in, say, the Columbia Gorge, which really should be considered execution fall speed height. And when I stand beside a roadway, which without any barrier between me and the traffic, I feel the same anxiety that I did in Columbia Gorge. I don't know if I did before I realized that I was essentially standing on the edge of a cliff. I think if you got a copy of this, there's a famous, anyway, in the urban studies realm, illustration of that made by a Swedish person. So anyway, to understand the risks of walking or biking on the side of a street which does not have protected barriers, I still find it helpful to imagine that I'm, in effect, walking or biking along the edge of a cliff with a height that varies, that can be converted into the speed of the traffic, or the speed of the traffic converted into the height of the cliff. The city code has a similar view concerning heights. A rail is required if you're going to build a deck that is more than 30 inches, or 8 miles an hour if you fall off the ground. So we appreciate height, and I'd like to plant that seed in your mind. So with regard to the McVey-Stafford corridor, I urge the council, and I don't want to go ahead of myself or ahead of you, but to only consider designs with a buffer or barrier between automobiles or trucks and pedestrians or cyclists. In the concept which you'll be looking at, that means concept 2. Concept 1 does not provide barriers. Concept 2 does, at least, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but it does not in all the segments. There are 5 segments that you'll talk about. But I think it should be included in all segments. ALTA's concept 2 for segments 4 and 5 do not have barriers, but they do have plantings which I think could be adjusted to provide barriers. Segment 1, which is the closest to Highway 43, remains a tough nut, but I think needs to be addressed to provide a barrier between the pedestrian or the bicyclist and a cliff. The other point I'd like to make is I've been skeptical, and I remain skeptical regarding the efficiency of rectangular red flashing beacons. The data that I have been able to review shows studies that really have only been done in road segments that have very long sight lines, and that really doesn't apply to McVey-Stafford.
Well, Mr. No, and we did receive the information that you
Great.
sent in
Yeah.
very detailed, and we appreciate that. And we're only first hearing this information instead. There's been
Well,
many
I'll plant a seed in your mind then.
we appreciate
Yeah, I thought I
it.
was going to talk after they presented, but that's okay.
No.
I'll plant
It's
the
great. It's
seeds.
just a very, very start. So and we really appreciate
Okay.
you coming forward with this. It's good
And-
information.
I'm a little fast, I spoke a little faster than I would, but I'll leave it at that. There's more in your packet, but I won't go beyond the 3 minutes.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Is there anyone else here, public comment? No. Okay. We're next going to move on to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda this evening, we have item 6.2, which has actually been pulled, and we're going to move that to the January 2nd meeting. So the consent agenda, the amended consent agenda includes item 6.1. This is the purchase agreement for a new dump truck. Item 6.3, resolution 23-24. This is a resolution, City Council adjusting compensation for charter officers. And item 6.4, which is approval of our meeting minutes from November 7th and November 21st. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move up, no mic. Move to approve the consent agenda.
Yeah.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 6-0. Now moving on to council business. So we're going to start this evening with consideration of Ordinance 2943. This is an ordinance of the City Council establishing the Lake Oswego Vertical Housing Development Zone at the North Anchor site. Joining us to present is Long Range Planning Manager Eric Olson. Good evening, Mr. Olson.
Good evening, Mayor Buck and City Council. Thanks for having me here this afternoon. I'm here today to present an ordinance that would establish a Lake Oswego Vertical Housing Development Zone at the North Anchor site per Ordinance 2934. So I have 9 slides to present to you today, including this one. Hopefully it'll be quick. So just to start out with a quick review of vertical housing tax exemptions. The Vertical Housing Tax Exemption Program was originally established by the state back in 2003 and is now codified under state rules. Essentially, the intent at the time was to increase the supply of housing throughout the state by encouraging and incentivizing mixed-use, multi-story development projects. In 2017, administration and oversight of that vertical housing program was transferred from the state to local jurisdictions via Senate Bill 310. So now vertical housing tax exemptions are used by cities to encourage the private sector to build higher density mixed-use development in key areas. So these areas are often those that cities have previously identified as being suitable for higher density mixed-use residential and commercial development. And the tax abatement is essentially intended to encourage the private sector to build those types of developments that are already allowed in those parts of the city, more or less. So they provide a partial tax exemption on building improvement value for mixed-use developments. Again, that include housing on the upper stories, as you can see in the image here, and non-residential use on the ground floor. Some of the state rules outline specific requirements for that ground floor residential use, including that at least 50% of that ground floor have commercial use, and that it's constructed to building code standards for commercial use and planned for commercial use upon completion. So you can see, obviously in the slide here, we have an image of the Windward, which was not constructed pursuant to vertical housing tax exemptions. However, it's very much the type of product that these vertical housing development zones are intended to produce. All right, so the zones themselves, I'll just explain a little bit about vertical housing development zones. Might call them VHDZs here, but they're essentially the areas where properties are eligible to apply for those tax exemptions. These zones can be applied to an individual site or to a larger area or district where development is being targeted. So it's important to note that, for market rate construction, the tax abatement will only apply to the value of the building itself. When it comes to affordable housing, land value may be exempted in certain cases. The partial tax abatement would last for a period of 10 years, after which point the entire value of the development would be placed back on the tax rolls. And the exemption would apply to all taxing districts that don't opt out when the vertical housing development zone is established. I'll talk about that a bit more in a few slides here. Just general, the mechanics, we've already gone through this a bit at council, but VHDZs provide partial tax exemptions for about 20% per eligible residential floor. So for a 2-story development with commercial on the ground floor and 1 story of residential above, there'd be a 20% exemption. You could get up to an 80% exemption with a 5 or more story building. So once, we've designated a VHDZ in a particular area, developers of property within the area are then able to apply to the city to receive the vertical housing exemption as long as they meet program requirements. So again, this is probably information that you're all familiar with, but just some very large background on sort of what we're doing here with the North Anchor site and vertical housing. So as you're all aware, the city adopted back in 1986 the East End redevelopment plan, listing nearly 24 projects to be completed within the boundaries of that area. It was amended in 2004, but that plan identified the First Street North Anchor project as a high priority project, and recommended creating a mixed-use development at that site. Again, we're familiar with this, but it's the northeast and northwest corners of First Street and B Avenue. So on December 7th, 2021, again, you're all aware of this, but just as some quick background, the LoRa Board, Lake Oswego Redevelopment Agency, entered into a development agreement with a developer, Urban Development Partners, UDP, to develop that North Anchor site with a boutique hotel and mixed-use residential and commercial buildings. In May of this year, again, review that you're all aware of, but the LoRa Board received a project update from UDP, and during that update, they indicated that they had experienced some difficulty securing financing for the project due to economic conditions, including COVID-related supply chain disruptions, significant increases in construction costs, interest rate increases, and inflation. So these are larger economic factors that really aren't just effective here in Lake Oswego. They apply everywhere. So this isn't something that's unique to our city. And it's just generally becoming more and more difficult for projects to pencil. So essentially, at that point, the lower board asked UDP to explore options that would immediately move that project forward without compromising overall quality. And in June, essentially, a request to extend the date of completion on the development agreement with UDP was extended by 6 months. It's been extended further since then, but essentially, as a part of the agreement to extend that date for the DDA, UDP requested that the city explore adopting a vertical housing pilot program for the residential portion of the North Anchor properties. So really quick background on what's happened since then. Essentially, you all directed me to start exploring that and staff to start exploring the creation of a vertical housing program at the North Anchor site. We gave the Planning Commission an update, and we held a study session with you all on September 19th of this year. So at that study session, you all formally directed staff to bring forth a proposal that would establish this vertical housing development zone at the North Anchor sites. And I just wanted to point out this also kind of relates to our work on the housing production strategy, of course, as well, per House Bill 2003. So DLCD has identified vertical housing development zones as one of many potential strategies that could meet the requirements of the housing production strategy. So these are strategies that we were tasked by the state with considering and sort of looking into including in our housing production strategy work. So this is sort of kind of dovetailing with that effort as well. And I think it's important to point out also that this kind of pilot program, the idea is that this will be a pilot program. We can kind of see how it works out with the North Anchor site, and it will provide staff with some experience to assess VHDZ more broadly and to come up with a recommendation as to whether or not this would be something that could be expanded or should be expanded along with our housing production strategies. This will give us a little bit of an opportunity to identify potential issues, and it'll also sort of set the stage for further expansion if that's something that we are interested in doing. So in terms of the proposal, I'll talk a little bit about where specifically we're proposing. It's just kind of at the North Anchor properties as they've been sort of disposed of to UDP by the LoRa Board. Specifically, it's 500 through 520 and 525 First Street, 27, 33 through 41 and 95 B Avenue, and 504 North State Street. Essentially, you can see that area on the map. That's kind of the boundaries are just where those red properties, it's really just 4 properties, 4 tax lots in total. So the program would be administered under the state's sort of baseline provisions for vertical housing in the state rules, or in the state statutes, rather. So that includes, but would not be limited to, the boundaries, the application processes, project eligibility determination, and project certification. So if we do decide to move forward with potential expansion of that program, there could be more of an opportunity to, of course, look at the boundaries for potential expansion, but to take another look at those project criteria and create a little bit more detailed Lake Oswego specific criteria if that was something we decided to do. We've also proposed an application fee of $1,000, and that could be revised by a council resolution. So for all applications, there'd be that one fee. That's pretty standard for the ones that we've been able to examine throughout the state. And administrative rules can be adopted or amended by the city manager to implement and administer the program. So state rules required the city to notify local taxing districts that the vertical housing development zone was being proposed at least 60 days in advance of the scheduled adoption in the vertical housing development zone, so 60 days prior to today. The local taxing districts are listed on the slide here. These were all taxing districts that are impacted by the proposed vertical housing development zone. We sent out a notice on October 20th of 2023. As you can see, the taxing districts that were impacted include Clackamas County, as well as different sort of districts that are managed by Clackamas County, their economic development department, education service district, soil and water conservation, and vector control. There was the school district here in Lake Oswego, Oregon Metro, Portland Community College, and the Port of Portland. So basically, the state rules stipulated that once these entities received notice of the proposed vertical housing development zone, they would have 30 days to decide whether they wanted to opt out of that proposed district. So during that period, we actually received a couple of requests to discuss the proposed vertical housing development zone at 2 taxing district meetings. One was the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners on November 7th, and the other was the Lake Oswego School District Board on November 20th. So staff was able to attend each of those meetings and answer questions and provide information about our proposal, and ultimately none of these taxing districts opted out of our proposal. So state rules also require the city to consider the potential for displacement of households within a proposed vertical housing development zone before we designate it. There are, as I mentioned before, 4 tax lots located within our proposed vertical housing development zone. These are all currently developed with existing vacant commercial structures and associated kind of surface parking lots to those structures. There are no existing residences within the area, so we would find that there would be no displacement risk because of that. There's nobody that lives there right now. All right, just to talk a little bit before I finish about the fiscal impact of the proposal. So if this is kind of under the situation where the VHDZ is approved and North Anchor mixed-use development is constructed more or less as envisioned. So under the proposal, the city would forego tax revenue from the residential component of the North Anchor development for that 10-year period. And then after that period, again, the entire value of the property would be placed on the tax rolls. Currently, because the site has no tenants and is vacant, and it's owned by the city, the site is fully tax exempt. No tax revenues are received by the city and Laura on that property. So staff developed some estimates just to provide some context here of what kind of figures we could be foregoing as a city over this period of time. And we worked with the Clackamas County Tax Assessor's Office to get this using some broad assumptions about the project. But more or less, if the site is developed as envisioned, the city and Laura would collectively forego between about $56,000 to $97,000 per year of tax revenue per year, again, over 10 years. So in total, that would be between $640,000 or $854,000. So kind of depends on if there's 3, 3.5, 4 stories, but that's sort of the range that we're dealing with. And I think it's also worth pointing out, the city and Laura would still receive between $18,000 and $48,000 per year just on the commercial component of the property, so the hotel primarily, as well as some of the commercial buildings. So, that would be a total of about $213,000 to $427,000 over that same 10-year period. Ultimately, the biggest takeaway is that the construction of North Anchor would increase the amount of tax revenue for the city particularly when that sort of full amount of the tax revenue goes on the rolls after that 10-year period. But there would still be, in the interim, some tax revenue to the commercial component as well. All right, and so that essentially concludes my presentation. Essentially just want to point out this is also consistent with council goals to support business investment and job creation in the city and to ensure that the North Anchor redevelopment stays on track, and that the program would help to facilitate the development of 67 housing units in the downtown core as part of the North Anchor project, 8 of which would be affordable to those earning 80% of area median income. So staff's recommendation is to enact Ordinance 2943 that would establish the Lake Oswego Vertical Housing Development Zone at the North Anchor site. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Olson. Does anyone, I know we've talked about this program for a little bit now. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Olson? Questions? No questions? As part of our, this pilot program, I will say, Mr. Sin and I went out and visited with 2 of the taxing jurisdictions, the school district and the county. And I do think as we think about this, and just to get it on the record, it seemed very meaningful that we had a specific project, that we had no difficulties with that particular project, and that seemed to, much like Wilsonville has a similar situation where they have long properties that have really been trying, like we have for a long time, to get the project developed, just wasn't happening for whatever reason. And I think folks understand that, and it's better to get something off the ground than to see it sitting vacant, owned by the public, not doing anything, but kind of being a nuisance, right, year after year. But I would, and similarly for the school district, but I don't know if they would have had the same request had we gone with just a broad area saying, well, we're not sure what's going to be built there. We don't know, maybe something, but we just want to have this in case. I think because it was, we really appreciate those taxing jurisdictions coming on board, but I think it made a big difference that we had a tangible project and could show that this was really needed. And I think it's worth pointing out too, even with our other redevelopment projects, we have as a city always heavily subsidized, so this is a different program, but it's really no different than the big subsidies we gave to Lakeview Village and that we gave to the Windward. And I think downtown is a hard area to construct in because you have to go underground and the terrain is extremely rocky and it costs a lot of money. So I think that's just worth pointing out. This is a new program, but us partnering to make these developments happen is nothing new. Would you have a question?
I guess maybe a comment just to piggyback what you're saying. I just want everyone to be fully aware too that UDP really stepped up to the table because this is one component of several that they worked on to value engineer and to work this project into making it economically viable. So they're not just coming to us for a tax rebate to build the project. I think I want to make it very clear that there's been several other aspects to make this work. And so in partnership, it's a part of the portfolio, but I think it's a good investment from the city standpoint.
That's right. Thank you, Councilor Whitman. All right, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll
go
ahead. Go.
I move to enact Ordinance 2943.
Second.
All right, is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Olson. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sin. Okay, that's it for council business. We're going to move on to study session component of the meeting. This evening, we'll be hearing from Director Rooney, if we get the whole team, Mr. Broadus, Mr. Farley. We're going to be taking a first look at the McVey-Stafford Road corridor study on transportation options. Great.
Got the short seat here. That's for sure. There we go. Thank you. Good evening, councilors and mayor. I'm Erica Rooney, Public Works Director and City Engineer. And as mentioned by the mayor, we're here tonight to talk to you about the McVey-Stafford Corridor Vision Study. The 2 folks with me tonight, of course, are our Assistant City Engineer, Stephen Broadus, and our Transportation Traffic Engineer, Will Farley, who have done the yeoman's job on this effort and have really taken this project on from the very beginning and brought it to fruition, where we're going to share that with you tonight about all of the things that were done and what the recommendations are. So again, like all visioning plans, it's a starting point for trying to get a cohesive idea for how to move forward with a corridor. And by no means is it, set in stone that it has to be exactly this way, but it really starts to bring us together. And I look at Councilor Corrigan over there and think about Boones Ferry Road. Hopefully it won't take us 20 years on this one. But nonetheless, and live through what an effort that is in order to start to get the ideas on paper and something to build from as we move forward in the future. So they're going to go into a little bit more detail about it this evening, and we're here to answer any questions afterwards, but I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Rooney, and Mayor, Councilors, thank you for having me. Again, my name is Stefan Broadus. I am the Assistant City Engineer, and we'll be talking about the McVey-Stafford Corridor Vision Study. So a quick overview of the presentation this evening, going to talk about why we were looking at this corridor, and then go into a little bit of detail about what we found, what we're recommending, and next steps in this process. A quick overview of the corridor that is in study. McVey-Stafford is a minor arterial as far as functional classification goes. Sees about 15,000 vehicles per day for traffic volume, and then the limits of our study went from the south end Overlook Drive up to the north end at the terminus at Highway 43. Quick reminder of the council direction to staff on this item. In 2022, there was a council goal to improve transportation connections for all travelers and of all types in Lake Oswego. And there was an initiative, more specifically, to begin the process to create this concept plan for Stafford and McVey. In 2023, that took another step forward in the form of the initiative to adopt a transportation framework for Stafford and McVey. So with those directions, in 2022, staff began the effort, and first step in that was to identify and evaluate all of the existing conditions on the corridor. And not surprisingly, when looking at those existing conditions, we found several significant constraints and challenges that will need to be overcome in any sort of design moving forward. Some of those include overhead utilities, steep slopes on the sides of the corridor, and also longitudinally as well. And there's significant environmentally sensitive areas along the corridor. And one of particular note here is that there's very inconsistent pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities up and down the corridor. So that was one thing that we focused on. And then another big challenge is just a wildly inconsistent and fairly narrow at times right-of-way width. So per the Transportation System Plan, the TSP, a minor arterial like this would be about 80 feet minimum required in order to incorporate all the facilities that are called out in that typical minor arterial. And we have about 60 feet typical here along Stafford and McVey. There's some areas where we do have the 80 feet. That's not common. And there's some areas where it's as narrow as 56 feet. So some concessions will need to be made to that preferred typical section, obviously, in order to fit within the existing right-of-way. So after identifying the existing conditions and those constraints, our next step were to get the perspective of the community. And I wrote here, and I think it's very important to highlight the approach on this public outreach and the concepts that were developed. Gather community perspectives first, then start developing concepts second. So that's exactly what we did. There's two pictures up here on this slide. The first picture shows a map with several green dots and red dots. This was a tool that was used for our open house. This was the first open house that we held with members of the community invited. And using this tool, stakeholders were able to identify how they experience and use McVey-Stafford, so they could identify where their destinations were, so how they use the corridor to get where they would use this corridor to get to. And they could also identify challenges, whether it be crossing or speeds or visibility, anything like that, they could identify on this map. We use this tool along with just more free-form comment collection to really get a sense of common themes that were presented and use those to develop concepts, which you see small thumbnails in that third image, the one on the bottom. And this was the format of the second open house we held. So it was, first open house was no design concepts in hand, but basically, what are your experiences with this? We took that back, developed some concepts, and then represented it in a format of this is what we heard, and this is how we think we can incorporate and address some of those issues that were identified. And also of note, the list here is those were the 2 open house engagements that we held, but there were also several meetings with Transportation Advisory Board, as well as some of the neighborhood associations in the area. So I've talked about the existing conditions. I talked about what we heard from the community. Next, I want to speak a little bit to what the proposed concepts were to address those issues. And one of the images up here is a concept that shows a couple of elements I want to highlight. Dedicated pedestrian and cyclist facilities. It's something that was a common theme from the feedback that we gathered. Another item worth noting that doesn't really show up in a typical section like this is for signalization, new signalization, and improved signalization, as well as some access management items, areas where some vegetation can be cleaned up or some ingress egress can be modified in order to make safety or efficiency improvements along the corridor. I'm going to go into the next slide, and before I do, I want to give a little bit of a warning. It's kind of overwhelming. There's a lot going on, and the intent of the slide is not to analyze each and every one of these diagrams, but rather to highlight the third bullet point that's on this slide, is a consistency throughout the corridor. Now, with all of those varying right-of-way widths that I mentioned in the previous slide, the concept along the corridor can vary as you go from south to north. So when there's a little bit wider right-of-way, some additional turn lanes can be incorporated, or space for trees, or additional buffer for the pedestrian and cyclist facilities. So I'm going to go to this next slide to kind of show that variation, but the one thing to kind of highlight is the consistency of the overall concept that we're trying to achieve, which is vehicular lanes in each direction, and dedicated facilities for cyclists and pedestrians. And again, you'll notice the minor variations as you go from one end to the corridor to the other, but for the most part, the major objectives are in place on each and every one of them. So how do we implement this, and what are the next steps? So as an overall project, it's a quite substantial project, to put it mildly. So the estimated cost from one end to the other to do this as one large project is about $40 million. And so the staff's recommendation for next step would be to add this to our capital improvement plan, add this to our transportation system plan as a long-range project, and for now, add it into the capital improvement plan as an unfunded project. With that said, there are steps that we can take in the more near future, and so that would be some of these interim projects with a focus on minimizing stranded value on any of these projects. So that would look like designing projects that could be added to provide value immediately, and then also minimize or ideally eliminate any lost value there, things that would survive the ultimate construction of the big project, essentially. So what that could look like is access management, so that can again, be modifying ingress egress of certain intersections in order to provide safety or efficiency improvements. Rough order of magnitude cost estimate for something like that, anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000, depending on the intersection. We also can do crossing improvements at some of the intersections that we found could benefit from safer, more predictable pedestrian crossings. So those could be at Lakefront, Cornell, Laurel, and/or Patton. Each one of those probably ranging somewhere, again, between $50,000 and $150,000. And we also identified some signal modifications to improve the performance of some of these intersections. It could be done at Highway 43 or at Overlook Drive. Cost range on there somewhere about $100,000 plus. And then the largest of these interim projects would be a new signal, completely new traffic signal at the intersection of McVey and Cornell. And the cost estimate there, again, rough order of magnitude at this stage would be somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. So the idea here would be to add these interim projects to our transportation system plan, to our capital improvement plan, and we can add them relative to the other priorities we have in the plans themselves. One thing to keep in mind, anything that we add will take the place of something that's already existing. So it wouldn't replace it, but it could defer other things. So if we were to prioritize any of these items, say within the next few years, most likely defer something else out later in time. So with that said, thank you again for your time. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation, all the work on, very detailed study that we had done, but it's great. Obviously, this roadway has been in community discussions for a long time, so it's good to at least finally have something, written down that we can hopefully move forward. And I'll tell you what this looks like to me. This looks like a great mitigation project, doesn't it? That's what it looks like to me. Mitigation project. Yeah, let's put that on the list. That's good. Okay. Okay, questions? Councilor Afghan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could you do me a favor and go to the previous page? Out of these items, which relatively smaller dollars to the $40 million, which one of them would make the commuters' life easier and reduce their stress immediately?
So commuters, are you talking specifically vehicular traffic?
Yeah.
In that regard, I would say either the signal modifications to improve the efficiency of the intersections and/or the access management in order to make the turn movements onto McVey-Stafford more predictable and access essentially more predictable for users of McVey-Stafford.
Thank you for that. Another question, I do recognize that we would get pedestrian-friendly and bicycle-friendly spaces from point A to point B. Would this modification also help moving the traffic from point A to point B? Or are the number of lanes will stay the same, therefore not much improvement for that? I'm not suggesting that I'm against the project. I'm trying to understand what are all the different areas that this project will help.
So a lot of the remedies around intersections to get people to turn more efficiently, to turn quicker, will improve the flow of traffic behind them. Usually, like take Cornell, someone trying to turn left from McVey onto Cornell usually has to wait for quite a line of cars. The signal improvement here would make sure that they would have that moment to do it without that wait, and then the people behind them would be able to flow more efficiently. So there is benefits to even the pedestrians. Someone waiting to cross at an unsignalized intersection may cross and disturb traffic. Crossing at a signal, they get their own little green time. So even pedestrian and bicycle improvements, adding some expectation to the traffic out there can improve flow for everybody.
And then when we get to the McVey intersection, is that going to be a bottleneck? So we move everyone, so
McVey at State, or where at on McVey?
on the, not on, there were 2 points. One was Overlook and the other one was McVey. So as the traffic comes through town, is that point going to be a gate for moving traffic?
One end of it with State Street can end up being a bottleneck because that is a state highway that has a lot of through traffic on the other approaches as well. That could lead to some backup on McVey. Overlook and towards the roundabout on the south side also get some congestion as well. Both can spill back.
Okay, last question. Is there an opportunity to do this project in phases?
Absolutely, and I think that's what, you know, we're showing here as far as the interim projects go, and then the ultimate project. You could also break up that ultimate project in, you know, geographically, do a north segment and a south segment. That could be done. We haven't analyzed that specifically, but it could be done.
Thank you so much.
One thing, if I could just add to it too, is that the reason we don't want to break it into like block by block pieces is there's a stormwater component to all of this as well. And excuse me, these drawings don't show that, but we're going to have to incorporate that. And again, that's a very linear function that needs to be accommodated. So you wouldn't want to break it up into 10 sections, but maybe a couple, 2 or 3.
And moving the
Look for logical
overhead
breaks.
utilities to underground would be the same problem.
Well, this price tag does not include underground utilities.
Okay.
I will tell you that much.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Councilor Wu.
Yes, I just mean, you know, thank you. When I see the $40 million, it's just like, you know, this is a project that has to be done. If you know Lake Oswego, that it needs some love over there. And I agree with you that we should maybe do it, you know, step by step. And my question was, if we go, I was trying to see like maybe 2,400,000. If we put that, is it gonna count on the $40 million? Like when we do it, when we are doing the whole project that's not funded, are we gonna destroy that, or I don't know what? If you get what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, I think I do, and I think that's what I was trying to describe with really putting a focus on limiting stranded value or sunk cost into anything that wouldn't survive the ultimate construction. We don't know. We would, if we were to pursue any of these interim projects, we would definitely have that as a design consideration as we're moving forward to try to implement some sort of solution or combination of solutions that would, like as you said, that would basically reduce the cost of the 40 million because it could be a part of that bigger project once that got off the ground. Some of them, it's too early to tell really how, to what percentage the investment would be a part of that overall project. But that would definitely be a goal in any of these interim projects that we pursued.
Yeah, and the other question I have, I know Director Rooney is an expert on this. I really always defer to what she said. Like, what's the urgency of this compared? Because the city has a lot of places where, you know, Waluga, this area and other, but I know this area, it's really, for me, it's an emergency. I mean, when you go there, it needs to be something done. But how urgent it is, and I'm asking that related to the unfunded project and going to, like, in a realistic view, if that's what my question, the first one, how urgent it is. And if it's urgent, it has to be added to the CIP, that not on the unfunded CIP, but, and I know it's not realistic to say, oh, we are gonna put it on because we don't have the money. Now the question is, should we, Lake Oswego, consider a bond on all our transportation problems? Because in this rhythm, my grandchildren will come to this council and we won't go to like 1/3 of the problems we have, you know, so that, what do you think, how, like, thank you.
I think I understand what you're asking. So the thing is that, you know, our transportation system plan as a whole has a huge, couple hundred projects in it, as we've talked about many times. And the job that you all have is that you take the information we bring to you, these 200 projects, and set the goals and priorities for the city moving forward. And in recent years, several years ago, pavement management was a priority. And you recall that that's where the biggest percentage of our street fund went to that capital investment. A few years ago, the shift was much more towards pedestrian pathway improvements, because there's several hundred of those in the TSP, and most specifically to address the needs for our youth and our school. So we're only focusing on those pathways that are near the schools. This is certainly, I mean, this is the outcome of a project that was identified in the TSP. It had a, I don't remember the number in the TSP, but it was an identified corridor study. We've started this study process now, and this has to be weighed against all the other needs in the city. Urgency, I will tell you, things break that we already have, and getting those fixed are more urgent to me and for our department. So if a signal falls down, I would say that's urgent. We need to get it fixed. So there's nothing, I don't want to say there's nothing broken here, but there's not something broken. The road is not falling apart. It's not slipping off the side of the hill, that sort of thing. But it's not a great facility. And so that's a more difficult prioritization that we'd be looking to you all to help set those priorities as to where this fits amongst the pedestrian improvements, amongst pavement management. Because once again, we have all these needs, but not, you know, we'll never honestly have enough funding to do them all. But I think that's something that council should discuss and direct us on, particularly once we put this into the CIP and into the next transportation system plan update. We'll have these more specific components to be able to highlight in the next round, and then we'll do that conversation again about what are the priorities. Things that are broken might be more urgent, literally broken, like they used to exist, but now they failed. That's going to be urgent, but maybe an improved corridor is less urgent, and that's a decision we'd be looking for your direction from.
Thank you. So to clarify on the projects, I kind of had the same question. So we would add these into the list, and it wouldn't disrupt any of the projects that TAB's already prioritized for, because I see a set of different kinds of projects here, like the access management is a roadway project, right? Whereas maybe some of these crossing improvements would be the pedestrian projects, so they might fit into different categories, but it's not going to disrupt kind of your current path that TAB's already, or the council's already prioritized in the CIP, no, but we would all look at it comprehensively in a future budget year.
Right, yeah. So as you go through, and so the bienniums that were, whatever, a quarter of the way through the first biennium. Right. So that's set. We have our marching orders there and what we need to work towards. And then as we develop the next CIP, we can put some of these in there in the unfunded category. If your goals change this January or the following January, and you say all of a sudden McVey is more important than pedestrian facilities for schools, that's the direction we would go, and then it would at least be on the CIP in that list that we could change our priorities, as we have done many times over the years.
Yes.
Yeah, which is all fine. I don't mean to criticize that. It's just that's how things do work. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
We want to get them into those documents. In particular, we can put these into the CIP, which would be updated again with the next biennium. We'd put these in there so that it's more specific than what's there now, which is McVey-Stafford corridor study.
One big lump.
We'll now have specifics, put those in, and when we do the TSP, we'll update it as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilor.
So first, thank you. This is excellent work, and I love being able to see the sections and how it changes at the different points. So I really appreciate that. It's a great visual. And I think with what I am assuming we're gonna have more increased probably pedestrian uses with LoRac coming in. So I also appreciate kind of your breakdown of possible different, kind of smaller projects within bigger projects. So thank you very much for that. My question is probably getting a little more in the weeds, and actually, you might be able to answer this. When you have the barrier between the car and the cyclist, does that cause issues keeping that bike lane clean?
Yes.
Because I look at this and that's just kind of a red flag, where all of a sudden the cyclists are going to want to be in the road because the road is clear and that's not. So just as design, I just think we want to make sure to really, are we working with cyclists to give them the best experience possible?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And one thing that I should have mentioned earlier is that the barrier shown between the cycle lanes and the vehicular lanes is one potential design solution. It's also completely possible that there's not a barrier there at all, and the horizontal separation acts as that barrier by itself. And so, yes, these candlesticks, we call them candlesticks, are really shown here to highlight the fact that there is a separation, but what that would exactly look like in the final design still to be determined, and honestly, probably we would not recommend those for that exact reason that you're mentioning. It's maintenance.
Yeah, and I know this is the first go, and a lot of changes go into that. So I would just, again, since we're focusing on, well, safety for all forms of traffic, whether it's vehicle, bike, pedestrian, just, again, let's make sure we really kind of think through. I think sometimes the bike lanes, people are like, why aren't the cyclists in the biker lanes? Well, it's because they're dangerous. So just kind of keep the cyclists in mind. I think sometimes new solutions are proposed and they're not as good as what the intention was. And I also just want to comment, I really do appreciate the fact that we're giving a nice buffer to the pedestrians, because I think if it's, to our comment earlier today, when it's scary, people aren't going to use it. And I know for, Iron Mountain, even though a lot of changes, there's really no barrier between the pathway and the road. And I know for one, I don't like walking Iron Mountain because of that. So I really appreciate the work that goes into, at least, especially on the north side, it looks like there's a barrier all the way and most of the south side. So I appreciate that. And where there's not a kind of pedestrian walkway on the south side, are you seeing that? And I know we're dealing with space issues, but is there going to be a way to either cross the road if you happen to be on the south side to get to the north side? Or, is there just a way so something a pedestrian isn't stuck? You're walking the south side, you want to keep going, and all of a sudden you're like, uh-oh. Or I would just think about that.
Sure, absolutely. And we could get in that as we get into design. I think it would certainly be a goal to let someone continue to travel on the side of the road they're already on, as opposed to crossing them. That would probably be a last resort. To provide a crossing to the other side would be better than nothing, of course. But there's a couple of other design solutions that we would have at our disposal, including, in a space of extreme limited right-of-way, either acquiring additional right-of-way in order to incorporate those facilities, or perhaps merging the pedestrian and the bicycle facilities into some sort of shared use path or something like that. So there's several options that we could get to. And just to your point, crossing someone, especially at an unsignalized crossing, would be very low on our preference.
Yeah, no, as I said, whenever you have kind of that sidewalk or that designated pathway end, it's always, I just want to make sure we think, and I know you guys do this, but just let's make sure we think through those things. But I for a first go around, I'm very impressed. And my colleagues have already answered the numbers questions and so forth. So thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Verda. Councilor Willen.
Great effort. I think, and I'm very supportive of all this. I'm also looking at $40 million, which is probably really more like $60 million by the time you get into infrastructure and then you get into some of our other alignments with sewer and everything else. It could be an $80 million project. So that becomes a bigger nut than, I kind of feel like it's the dialogue we had for the Columbia River crossing on I-5, that we've come in with a great master plan that's fabulous, that, you know, I'm surprised you don't have TriMet bus lanes or something for light rail on here, but that's okay. I guess my point is, do we have options where, I think most critically I've heard the pedestrian part is the scariest and the most highest priority. And it's nothing to knock the bicycle people and our city manager who wants to be going up and down McVey safely. I want her safe as well. But is there a B plan or a C plan where you're looking at where you can put some of the mitigating signals and a few things, and then make a very safe pedestrian pathway, and find out if that's going to be a 35 million, or is it a 5 million, or is it a 10 million? I guess just so that, as my counselor colleague said, it'd be great if we could get this before our grandchildren are adults, you know, versus having it just on a CIP list, which I've seen some of the same items as for many, many, many years. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, is there an interim or another solution that could be investigated that would help improve it, but not have it this perfect envisionment that we might be able to fund? Because when you put it on the CIP list, I mean, it's like picking which child you want to send to college, and the rest of you have to wait. And I'm afraid that our appetite is really huge and our funding is not as big. And the only way I see this as getting done is if we go and get a bond. I mean, we can put it on the CIP, and there's no other sources of funding, is that correct? I mean, it's got to come locally. There's nothing out there from the state or anything else.
Well, we can try to compete for funding at the state level, but that has not turned out very well. Usually we don't compete well for those.
Right.
And the reason we don't oftentimes is it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but there aren't a lot of accidents. So we don't compete well for safety funding, or we don't compete at all. As a matter of fact, there's not anything there that helps us get points, if you will, in that criteria. So, I mean,
we have volunteers, are you saying? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
Statistical volunteers?
It's a good problem to have, but it does make it limited on where we can get outside funding. We have, you know, our street maintenance fee, which you all approved an increase a year and a half ago, and it went into implementation this last July, and that is to help pay for the pedestrian pathway program. So there's that resource. But bonds or, I don't know, we talked about these a couple of years ago, gas tax and other things that could be looked at again to add even more funding options. But at the time, we said the only direction we wanted to go was to increase the street maintenance fee.
So Erica, though, let me ask the question a slightly different way. Is if you're going to prioritize pedestrian safety and you're going to break the project into segments, as a frequent user of this street, I would say you're going to be dealing with the area between South Shore and State Street, right? Because at least there is a separated pathway, inadequate though it is, between South Shore and Overlook. There's something, whereas between South Shore and State Street, it's very hit or miss about whether there's a facility at all. So maybe as you guys are thinking about the project, if you do break it into segments, maybe a segment from South Shore and then a segment the other direction would be where the logical breaking point. And then you as counselors would have the option, if pedestrian safety was your filter, of thinking about it that way. It's still going to be $20 million, right? And let me ask a related question. How much of that $40 million is right-of-way acquisition?
So this plan shows fitting these improvements within the existing right-of-way. So there's no shown amount for right-of-way acquisition. That was not included in the estimate because it wasn't expected.
So, okay, let's get that clear, because that's an under the radar for most people. When you say right-of-way acquisition, that's not included in here. And
They don't
this-
need to acquire any, right?
We have zero.
Based on these preliminary concepts, there's no expected right-of-way acquisition. Now, if the design typical sections were to change or discovered through the design process, that could change. But based on these concepts, that was one of the things that was found in the study, is that right-of-way acquisition was not expected to be needed.
Which is a great, actually,
news.
that's great. That's a big plus, because we know how hard it is to acquire things, and the cost to that. So that's great news. I'm just looking at, it would help me to have some estimates to say, yeah, this is the A plan, B plan, and C plan, and what we could accomplish with each. Because if we don't look at it that way, then we're saying, okay, the only way we can do this is to go the whole thing. And I mean, I'm just being realistic. I just don't see us coming up with $60 or $70 million. Even you're right, we can raise the gas tax and we can raise our funding, our street funding, whatever. I think this community is getting tapped out on taxes. I mean, every time we get a little improvement. And it's not going to be, the street fund, we've increased it, and it's giving us $2 million a year? Is that, so if we took away everything for pathways, which is a higher priority for us, we've got another $50 or $75 million worth of those that we need to fund. I mean, these are all options. I just want to point out that let's not look at it myopically or through, just one lens. We have to look at the portfolio of things we want to do. I desperately think, and I agree that we need to do something with McVey, and I would just hope that we could get a win or two before our kids.
And did I hear your question? I mean, aside from breaking up the same, were you asking too, was there a way to even, simplify the plan for even between 43? And so are there other options besides these segments that we're looking at in the report that might be more feasible? Like if we're looking at options that are just not financially feasible at all, is that when we were kind of asking, are there other options?
Yeah, I mean,
that are safer?
I would be interested to see how much it would cost.
Or is it this or nothing?
To find out what a pathway is, because you're right.
What I heard, though, Director Rooney say is that once you start putting pavement out here, you're dealing with stormwater. And so I would guess the answer to the question is maybe not. Because at some point, I mean, there is already a wide shoulder on this road. As someone who not only bikes it, but walks it frequently, it's not, I agree with the gentleman who spoke earlier, when you're walking next door to a car going 35 miles an hour, it's not particularly comfortable place. And so at some point, you have to separate the pedestrians from the traffic, either this way or this way. And once you do that, you're dealing with stormwater. So I think that's what I heard Director Rooney say earlier, is that the challenge here is all of the linear infrastructure, not so much is there a lower cost type of
There are
pavement.
options that are facing, but not necessarily in design.
Right.
And I don't think we want to go to, I could be wrong here and speaking out of turn, but I don't, can you go back to like a cross-section? Yeah, so I don't know that we'd want to do something interim such as don't put in bike lanes and just put in sidewalks. Because that would be, as we talked about a little bit earlier, that's sort of like a future throwaway. If the ultimate section to accommodate bikes and peds is this, if we only put in sidewalks where those bicycle facilities are right now, someday that would need to be thrown away and pushed out and redone. So we'd want to be careful about that. That's that sunk cost that Mr. Broadus talked about. Is that really what we want to do?
And I totally agree, right.
I don't know if that's a plan C.
It may not even have a pedestrian on both sides. It may be one side. I guess I'm looking at it as pedestrian is a super high concern of everyone because of what, and what would it cost to help solve that issue so that people can walk up and down McVey. And to the city manager's point, we do have it covered from basically South Shore up to Overlook already. I mean, it's sort of, kind of, but I mean, it's better than Iron Mountain, okay? I mean, and they go 45 or 50. We talked about that this morning. So, I mean, that's not 35. It's fast. So I guess my point is that is there alternatives that we could do to help solve that issue without getting even into some of the stormwater issues? I don't know whether that's and killing the dig once, whatever thing. I totally get that. And if we have huge, I don't know what the stormwater priorities are that match up to this, whether we're at desperate need to reduce stormwater on McVey, or are we at a point to where that's a low priority within that? If it's super high priority, then maybe there is, sense in doing both projects at once.
Well, this project would require us to manage the stormwater that we're creating from this. So all of these cross sections are an increase in the impervious area. And when we do that, we're required to manage it through both quantity and quality. So it forces us to have to do a stormwater component to these projects because we've gone from this much pavement or impervious area to this much. No matter what you've added, if you're adding and increasing it, it triggers stormwater improvements.
Right.
But to your point, what I think I hear you say is like, could we look at doing one side?
Right.
Could we do one sidewalk? I don't know, I'll pick one west side or something like that right now. Go through and put in a sidewalk and a bike lane, because that's the up, I call it this uphill side, if you will. We did not break it down any further than what you've seen here, but we could certainly talk about going to that next level and seeing what that would look like.
Right, just even ballpark. If it's a 5% discount, well, then we know you have to do the whole thing.
Right.
If it's half the cost, well, then that's a whole nother thing. I guess it's just the options I'm looking at.
Yes.
So you can make a good decision. That's all I'm saying. But it is exciting that this was done, and we've got somewhat of a gliding path that we can go down or not, but at least we know what the concepts are.
Good. Thanks, Councilor Wendland. Councilor Corrigan.
Yeah, so I guess my question is about the glide path. Thinking about this out in the future, can you identify any trends that you could project to tell us, like which parts of the corridor are most problematic and like when that would occur? Is it possible to do that as we frame this, how we might deal with it in the future?
Sure, and I think to go back very briefly, Councilor Wendland, to your question, you had phrased it as Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. I think, we show Plan A as this end-to-end $40 million project, so maybe that's Plan A under that terminology. Plan B, we also talked briefly about the possibility of maybe cutting it up into two segments to make it a little bit more financially feasible to implement some of it. I think Plan C could be some of these interim projects that you see up here. And one of the common feedbacks, themes that we heard from the community is traveling McVey-Stafford, the corridor, longitudinally a challenge, yes. But maybe even more so, the theme was crossing it. Just crossing it. From one side from one neighborhood to cross it into the other neighborhood going for a walk, or from one side of McVey crossing it to go to a destination that could be a grocery store, a restaurant, whatever. So origin, destination types of things. So as far as investment to value ratio goes, a lot of these interim projects are going to be huge value to the community with very little risk as far as sunken costs, throwaway costs that we call them, especially these crossing improvements. So when we look at these cost estimates of $50,000 to $150,000 relative to $40 million, and for that relatively minor investment, we are addressing one of the biggest feedback themes that we heard from people in these groups. So, Councilor Corrigan, to your question, is it able to predict trends? Well, we would look at something like origin, destination. So origin being housing, destination being, what are people trying to walk to? Schools, restaurants, grocery stores, things of that nature. And we have some of those addressed where, such as at South Shore, where there's signalized intersections, so people can more safely cross there. But then we have a couple of other intersections we've identified here that a crossing improvement, again, a relatively minor investment, could make a big difference.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, that like the crossing improvements could be something as simple as the rapid beacon that was discussed earlier, right? So we say Lakefront, Cornell, Laurel, Patton, that's 4 intersections. Let's say it's the 150 each. For $600,000 to $800,000, let's say $1 million, just to round it up. For $1 million, you could make 4 crossing improvements in that corridor that would be appreciated by the residents right away and wouldn't be necessarily hard to implement. Depends on electricity and a few things like that. But if they were all just RFBs, rapid rectangular flashing beacons, then that might be a pretty effective starting point and relatively small in the scheme of things.
Okay.
It'd be great
That's
to
great.
give people a win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of big impact for a relatively small amount of dollars. That's good information for us to know what is going to be most impactful.
And it doesn't address the longitudinal, like you said, of getting up and down the corridor for a pedestrian, but it certainly helps how hard it is to cross now, and I think we've all experienced that. I know you have, I know we have too, that as a pedestrian, you just like, oh, I hope somebody gives me a break here.
Right. Well, I mean, we have to think about this roadway. I mean, it's almost the cost size. It will be greater than the entire Boones Ferry Road project at this cost, which required an urban renewal district.
Yes.
About the same. Well, but by the time, yeah, maybe in those days, dollars, whatever. But that took an urban renewal district, a general obligation bond, state funding. I mean, it was a massive 2-decade long. So, I mean, Councilor Winden's point is really well taken. I mean, when we go down the road, I mean, if we just have a plan sitting on the shelf that we can't afford ever, then, what have we done? So at some point, we may need to say, well, what, I mean, that's great, like Mr. Burris, the Plan C projects, for sure, getting those on at least on the CIP and then into the priority list as we progress. But at some point, the big project will have to make a decision. What can, we afford? Because doing something, even if it's half the road or is better than not doing anything ever. And we do still have, I made kind of tongue-in-cheek comment about the mitigation, but seriously, I mean, this is one of the corridors that we've identified as a main route impacted by diversion, and it's great that we have done this plan because now we have a project to say, and here are the infrastructure deficiencies. Although some of the things we've identified, well, not some, but just maybe the signal modifications, I thought that actually was one of the scant mitigation projects ODOT was giving us with some tape as well. Tape and signal modification, yeah. So we won't pay for that one yet. So maybe that will be the one. But I really think we should continue to advocate for this project, whether it's through revenue sharing or as we continue in our conversation with the state, because that, this is a critical, and it is very much lacking. And I thought, taken from that report, the biggest takeaway for me was how people that live in the Hallinan and in that neighborhood don't have any other option. I mean, this is it. This is it. Crossing down, it's accessing, George Rogers Park, accessing the commercial area, and so it's a critical roadway that, like, there may not be accidents. It's like many of our roadways. There's not accidents, but they certainly don't feel safe. I did wonder if there's even any smaller things like any vegetation management. I know there's one stretch where you feel like you're hugging a hedge, and I don't know how, that hedge just seems to keep kind of coming. If there's any, and I don't know where that hedge sits. I'm guessing it's in the right of way, but I don't know. But anyway, that's an easy one, if we already own the area, the hedge. I just want to ask another question about, a Burgess. Are we doing a crosswalk at Burgess as part of the LoRac? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. LoRac will be installing curb bulb outs at Burgess with our RFBs.
Okay. No light at Burgess, but pedestrian signal.
Pedestrian signal.
And if we did pedestrian signals, at these other intersections crossing, Lakefront and Cornell, that could also help to, with access management as the traffic stops to allow people can, or no, maybe not.
The access management that's discussed is more of what approaches can we live without? Where do we want to close vehicle access to or consolidate vehicle access at? North of South Shore, there's quite a few accesses and some good street spacing that has other connectivity to it that we may be able to close access from one street because they can get it from the next one down as easy. So not having so many accesses allows traffic to move a little bit more efficiently because all the turning points are consolidated.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. It's helpful. Okay. Any further questions?
And how much is a tunnel?
So I think it sounds like everyone's on board adding these projects onto our large list, and then when we come back to reprioritize. So we'll continue to consider these important, because this is an important roadway. And we did, I mean, the impetus, all the construction with the LORAC, Council Verdict said, I mean, there will be more pedestrian and vehicular traffic, and then not to mention, of course, what's going on with interstates and the rest of that. So it is an important roadway, but that's a problem. We have too many important roadways.
So the money that we allocated towards this study, is it all completely spent then, or is there more money left?
This is ARPA dollars, and any ARPA dollars that aren't left are going to go to filling the giant hole that is Lakeview Boulevard, I believe.
Yeah. We've spent, I'm trying to remember how much we spent on this, sorry.
Let us get back to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let us
Yeah.
get back to you. That's a great question, and you deserve an accurate answer and not putting these guys on
No,
the
that's
spot.
fine. I just didn't know whether
Yeah.
we were, this is like the first 2/3 of this, or if this is the whole wad of the
Back and double
study,
check.
and then we're
Yeah.
done.
We've expended the contract we had, but that may
Right.
not be all the money we had, you're right.
Okay.
Got the point.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. Thanks for the good work on this and all the public engagement and for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
That's great. Okay. All right, folks, information from council. Does anyone have any updates? Share? I have a few updates. Got a couple updates here. First update, I would just like to thank Council Verdict for doing such a great job serving as our 2023 council president. We appreciate the great work you did serving in this role. There's more that comes with it than you may know. A lot of it's secret, so good job. Thank you. Thank you. A few of us hosted the Council General of Japan just before this meeting. It was great to establish a relationship there. He's visiting the 24 cities in Oregon that have sister city relationships with cities in Japan. Yoshikawa, of course, is our sister city, which would be great to, reinvigorate our relationship. So we're going to work with his office on doing that with our sister city. They're great. They're always sending us information on what they're doing in their town. But he took a great tour of the city, was very impressed with the building, and we talked a lot about our shared challenges or our challenges here in Lake Oswego, but he loves Lake Oswego. We had a ribbon cutting. Several, Councilor Corrigan, Councilor Verdict, myself were at the ribbon cutting for the Habitat project, so it's great to see that project moving forward. 23 townhomes, I think about 50 kids living there when it's all done. Take about a year and a half for them to construct, and they've been, preparing the dirt over there. There's a subcommittee of the legislature that's receiving testimony. Ms. Bennett put this in a weekly update. There are 3 public meetings. 2 of them have taken place. One of them was in Multnomah County, up on the I-5 corridor. The second one was in Wilsonville, and the cities of Wilsonville, Tualatin, and Lake Oswego were invited to present, as well as members of the public packed. The next meeting is on January 6th, and that's for Gladstone, Westland, and Oregon City, kind of for their city leaders to present, and then for community members again. So if anyone's interested, this subcommittee just hearing feedback on tolling. It's quite, different areas of the region have different unique issues. Wilsonville is in a completely different situation than Multnomah County is along I-5. Our infrastructure is different, our access to transit and everything else. But Mr. Farley did a good job preparing a letter that I think you included that was very specific to they have specific topics at each meeting they want to have covered. my comments were not specific to those topics. They were general comments about tolling the whole program and comprehensive transportation funding. I can share those if anyone's interested. And then, of course, just a reminder that the city has out on social media that we're, soliciting comments, feedback for our goals, and we can share that with people that we know too, because it's great to get the feedback on the goals. I know boards and commissions are, we have the new process this year, but they are also going through kind of a summary of what they did, 3 things they did in last year, and kind of the 3 topics they'd like to focus on in the year to come that could help us as we form our goals too. So that's all I have.
We're closed next Monday. We're closed the following Monday. Hopefully we get to stay closed. 'Cause it doesn't always happen, as you all know. I did want to let you know that the materials for goal setting for your work will go out the very first week of January. So when we send it out to you, we'll send you out all of the comment received. Ms. Linder will package it all up, and we are hearing some themes that you already know about, because, for example, Friends of Lusher were here tonight. We're hearing quite a bit about that. We're also hearing quite a bit about pedestrian safety, as we have for the past few years. But there's a handful of other topics that we're hearing about. But I will send you your department head recommendations, the stuff from the boards and commissions, and all the public comments for your feedback. But that won't come until the Friday before goals, or the Friday the 5th. So,
Okay.
All right. Other than that, great year, you guys. I thought you had a great year.
Good year. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Okay, well, next we are going to move into executive session. Before we do so, Ms. Osnak, will you please read the legal parameters for us?
Thank you, Mayor Buck, members of the council, the Lake Oswego, the Lake Oswego City Council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of consulting with its attorney regarding legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, to review and evaluate the employment-related performance of the chief executive officer of the public body, a public officer, employee, or staff member who does not request an open hearing, and also to consider records that are exempt by law from public inspection. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session, and representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general nature, general subject of the session as previously announced, and no decision will or may be made in executive session.
Okay, thank you so much. Just so folks know, this will conclude the broadcast portion of the meeting. We wish everyone a happy holiday weekend ahead and a happy new year. We'll recess and re-adjourn in the side room.